My Antonia is a novel by Willa Cather, published in 1918. This modernist frontier and autobiographical fiction is set in the fictional town of Black Hawk in Nebraska during the 1880s to 1910s. It is from the first-person perspective of Jim Burden, who narrates his memoir as an older man reflecting on his childhood. Only the introduction to the novel is narrated by an unnamed childhood acquaintance of Jim. Don't forget to share and subscribe. The novel begins with an unnamed narrator, a childhood friend of Jim Burden. Now both adults, they live in New York City, but rarely see each other. Jim works as a lawyer for a railroad and travels often. Although he is married, he doesn't have a close relationship with his wife, who spends her time socializing with mediocre writers and artists. Jim still feels a strong connection to the American West where he grew up, and his job allows him to stay close to that world. One summer, the narrator runs into Jim on a train in Iowa. During their conversation, Jim keeps talking about Antonia, a bohemian immigrant girl they both knew in Nebraska. Jim tells the narrator that he's been writing down his memories of her. Months later, Jim brings the narrator a manuscript titled Antonia, which Jim had finished the night before. He admits it's not organized, but he wrote it exactly as he remembered things. Before giving it away, he writes the title on the cover, My Antonia. When Jim Burden is 10 years old, he travels by train from Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains to Black Hawk, Nebraska, to live with his grandparents after both of his parents died. He's accompanied by a farmhand named Jake Marpole. On the same train is a poor immigrant family from Bohemia, and only Antonia speaks very little English. They're also headed to Nebraska. When Jim arrives, he's met at the station by Otto Fuchs, a cowboy with an Austrian background. Jim's grandparents are kind, religious, and generous people. Jim enjoys the open frontier and all the natural life around him, from animals to plants. It's still summer when he arrives. Soon after, the Burdens meet the Bohemian family, the Shimerdas, who have been cheated into buying poor land by another Bohemian man, Peter Krajek. Mr. Shimerda is homesick and was once a musician, and Mrs. Shimerda always complained. Ambrosch, the oldest son, is rude and selfish. Marek Shimerda is mentally challenged. Yulka Shimerda is a quiet young girl. Antonia, the oldest 13-year-old Shimerda daughter, grabs Jim's hand when they first meet, and they quickly become good friends. Jim teaches Antonia English, and they explore the countryside together. Although the Shimerdas are struggling, they befriend two Russian men, Peter and Pavel. The Burdens try to help the family as much as they can. One day at the end of summer, Jim kills a large snake and impresses Antonia, who had been treating him like a little boy. Then winter arrives. Jim gets sick, and Pavel dies. Mr. Shimerda becomes very sad after Peter leaves to work in railway construction. Jim's grandparents realize that the Shimerda family doesn't have enough food or warm clothes. They try to help, but a heavy snowfall traps everyone inside their homes. The Shimerdas are left without proper meals or any Christmas presents. Once the snow melts, Jim's grandparents invite them over, but the visit goes badly. Mrs. Shimerda is jealous and upset, and Mr. Shimerda feels heartbroken, remembering his peaceful life back in Bohemia. In January, just 2 days after Jim's birthday, and during a snowstorm, Mr. Shimerda takes his own life in their barn. Jake suspects Krajek had something to do with it, but no one can prove it. Jim is left alone in the house the next day and feels like Mr. Shimerda's spirit is traveling back to his homeland. A newcomer from Bohemia, Anton Jelinek, travels from Black Hawk to help with the burial. Mrs. Shimerda insists that the grave be dug at the corner of their land, where she believes roads will eventually cross. After this, neighbors, including the Burdens, do more to help the Shimerdas. Antonia begins working in the fields alongside Ambrosch and stops going to school. Jim feels upset that they no longer spend as much time together. After 3 years on the farm, when Jim turns 13, his grandparents and him move to the nearby town of Black Hawk so Jim can attend school. Antonia also moves to town to work for the Harling family. Other immigrant girls come to town for work too. They're called the hired girls. Jim spends a lot of time with Antonia and the Harling children. Dancing becomes popular in town, and Antonia loves going. The Harlings, worried about her bad reputation with the local boys, let Antonia go. She goes to work for Willa Cather, a moneylender known for being untrustworthy with women. Antonia rejects Jim's romantic overtures, labeling him as a younger brother. During this time, Jim becomes more isolated. He mainly focuses on school and being with Antonia and the other hired girls. When Willa Cather tries to assault Antonia, she quits her job with him and starts working at a local hotel. Around the same time, Jim finishes high school. Before he leaves for college, he and Antonia take one last trip to the Prairie. They remember their shared childhood. As the sun sets, they see a plough standing out against the sky, looking large and glowing. They realize this image marks the end of their time together, like a farewell to their past. Jim wants to leave Blackhawk and eventually goes to college in Lincoln, where he becomes close to his Latin teacher, Gaston Cleric. Jim realizes he's not as dedicated to scholarship as Gaston is. Lena Lingard, one of the hired girls, visits Jim in Lincoln, where she works as a dressmaker. They start going to plays together and spend a lot of time with each other. Gaston warns Jim that he's getting distracted from his studies and invites him to transfer to Harvard. Jim agrees and says goodbye to Lena. 2 years later, before starting law school, Jim returns to Blackhawk and hears that Antonia has had a baby out of wedlock. She was supposed to marry a man named Larry Donovan, but he abandoned her in Denver, days before their wedding. She returned home, worked the farm, and avoided people. Jim visits Antonia and confesses his love for her. She's surprised he doesn't look down on her, but she dismisses his romantic confession. He promises to come back, but he doesn't return for 20 years. Jim, now a prosperous New York lawyer, hears that Antonia married a kind man named Anton Kozak, also a Bohemian immigrant. They have 11 children. When Jim visits the Kozak farm, he's warmly welcomed by her children. At first, Antonia doesn't recognize him, but when she does, she's overjoyed. She shows him around the farm, which is full of life and happiness. Jim sleeps in the barn with 2 of the boys and meets Mr. Kozak the next day. He likes him immediately and sees that Antonia and Kozak have a strong equal relationship. Kozak tells Jim how much he loves her. Before leaving, Jim promises to go hunting with Antonia's sons. On his way out, he visits the old dirt road leading to his grandparents' farm. Standing there, he thinks about how this road shaped his life, and how now he has come full circle, back to where it all began. Let's thematically analyze My Antonia by Willa Cather. My Antonia is about life on the American frontier in the late 1800s, focusing on immigrant families. Nebraska is shown as a mix of cultures. American-born settlers live alongside immigrants from Europe, like the Bohemian Shimerdas, the Russians Peter and Pavel, and Lena, who is Norwegian. The novel portrays immigrant life with empathy. These families miss their homelands, struggle with the English language, and feel out of place because of cultural and religious differences. The American-born settlers in Blackhawk often judge them harshly, which makes it difficult for them to fit in. Because of the town's strict social rules, life is much easier for native-born Americans, as Jim can go to school. But Antonia has to quit and work in the fields after her father dies. Though the novel sympathizes with immigrants, it doesn't push for social change. Jim is looking back on a time that has already passed. He shares many of the same views as the native-born settlers and doesn't question the social system. My Antonia is more personal than political. It focuses on emotions and memory rather than trying to change laws or society. In 1862, the United States government passed the Homestead Act, offering land to anyone willing to settle it. Some, like Jim's grandparents, moved west from other parts of America, while others, like the Shimerdas, came from Europe hoping for a better life. Both groups were seeking opportunity and faced hardship in an unfamiliar land. Jim and Antonia struggle with homesickness, but the immigrant families face even more difficulties. They deal with extreme poverty, language barriers, and the pain of being outsiders. Jim writes his story to reconnect his present life as a successful New York lawyer with his lost childhood on the Nebraska prairie. His story brings his memories to life. In the novel, several characters look back on the past. Jim and Antonia think about their early days on the farms. Lena remembers her time with her family, and the Shimerdas and the Russian men recall their former lives in Europe. Antonia misses her home in Bohemia as Jim misses Nebraska, but neither can return. This loss gives the novel its emotional and nostalgic tone. It's possible that Willa Cather herself felt this way about her childhood in Nebraska, and that feeling comes through in the narrative. For Jim, the past stands for childhood innocence. For immigrants like the Shimerdas, it means the comfort and familiarity of the homes they left behind. Mr. Shimerda never stops longing for Bohemia, and Peter and Pavel cannot forget the dark secrets of their youth in Russia. The characters don't reflect on big historical events. Instead, they remember their personal lives. Jim titles his manuscript My Antonia, instead of simply Antonia. By doing this, he shows that what he's really written is a personal account, his memories, feelings, and his version of who Antonia is to him. Jim visits Nebraska 20 years later and decides to stay in touch with Antonia. He no longer sees her only as a memory, but as a real part of his present life. In this way, he learns to carry the past with him, rather than live only in it. Jim treasures his childhood friendship with Antonia, and she chooses to stay near her father's grave on the prairie, which reminds her of their final years together. When Jim starts to feel romantically attracted to Lena, he begins to move away from his earlier childlike friendship with Antonia. And when Antonia gets caught up in dancing and social life, she is no longer the same farm girl she once was. On the prairie, Jim and Antonia's friendship was easy and pure, as they were too young to care about class, gender, or expectations. But their move from the countryside to town marks the beginning of adulthood. Antonia has to grow up fast because of her father's death, life in town, and becoming a mother. For Jim, growing up happens more slowly, especially after he moves to college in Lincoln. When he falls in love for the first time with Lena, he realizes how special his childhood bond with Antonia was. It was, in his eyes, the most sincere and uncomplicated love anyone can have. For settlers like the Burdens and the Shimerdas, the prairie gives them food and a way to live, but it can also be harsh and dangerous. Jim gets seriously ill one winter, and one summer he nearly dies from a snake bite. Still, he and Antonia feel deeply connected to the land, and as adults, they look back on it as a place of beauty and honesty. They love the bright colors, the changing seasons, and the wide-open skies. Their feelings often match the mood of the land. For example, Jim feels lonely during his first winter in town, and Antonia is upset not because a tramp killed himself, but because he did it during the happy season of summer. For immigrants, the vast land feels full of hope, but also frightening because starting over is hard. The prairie stands for both progress and loss. As towns and farms grow, the old paths and wild grass are replaced. Later, when Jim leaves Nebraska, the prairie becomes a symbol of his friendship with Antonia and the innocence of his youth. The plow that Jim and Antonia see against the setting sun represents the bond between people and the land. For a moment, the plow and the sun blend together in a perfect image of balance, showing how nature and human life are connected. But as the sun keeps going down, the plow looks smaller and smaller, as if nature is overpowering it. The plow stands for all the hard work families like the Shimerdas and Burdens do on the prairie. It also marks a turning point. Jim is about to leave for college, and Antonia will stay behind. The beautiful scene suggests the end of one part of their lives and the changes coming to the land as farming grows and the wild prairie disappears. Hope you comment and subscribe.